Hello, I am Baal Kadmon, and I'd like to thank you for watching and or listening to this video. So, today is September 24th. Yesterday was the Rapture, and if you're listening to this, you didn't make it. And neither did I. But guess what? You didn't make it, no one made it, and no one ever will. So in this video, I'm going to explain why I say this, because biblical topics tend to be something that I'm very interested in. And of course, the rapture has come up a million times, the concept of rapture, since I've been studying the Bible. And earlier in my life, before I understood the concepts, I was like, all right, well, maybe that's true. I don't know. Maybe people do get taken up and whatever, right? But the notion of the rapture is actually completely, a misunderstanding of the New Testament text, and also an invention, a complete invention of a later commentary. So I'm going to examine why the idea of the rapture is just false. But let's examine the biblical passages that sort of started this whole thing. We have 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 through 17, and it says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." Now, this is the classic proof text for the rapture, right, amongst certain groups. Now, Paul is writing to reassure the Thessalonian Christians about believers who had died before Christ's return. Now, to many readers, this description sounds exactly like the rapture scenario, right? I mean, living Christians suddenly whisked off the earth to meet Jesus somewhere in the sky. But when you read Paul's words within the first century cultural setting, it alters the picture significantly. Because in Paul's time, when an emperor or a governor approached a city, the people would go out to greet him and escort him back in a grand ceremonial procession. The Greek word used here is to meet, apanthesis, and that carries this connotation. In ancient Roman practice, the event of a ruler's arrival, adventus, involved the city's citizens coming out to meet, apanthesis, the honored guest on the road, and then celebrating as they all moved into the city together. So what Paul is doing here, he's deliberately tapping into a familiar image, right? Jesus is the arriving king, right? And believers go out to meet him as he descends. Now, the crucial point is what happens after the meeting in the air. The believers accompanying Christ in his royal arrival to earth, like the welcoming party of a king, they don't keep floating in the sky. The text doesn't suggest this at all. Remember, this is the coming of Jesus. He is coming to earth. He's returning. He's not just taking his followers and leaving. He is coming back to earth. So all those people who just greeted him are coming back down, okay, to the new earth, right? And also, as we have seen that the rapture is going to sort of come secretly, right? It's a hidden event. All Christians will just zap, right? But nothing in the passage suggests that this is a hidden event. On the contrary, the description is quite loud and public. There is a shout, an archangel's voice, and the trumpet of God. This is the grand finale, not some type of confidential disappearance. Paul calls it the coming of the Lord, a term in Greek often referred to the official or public visit of a ruler. The word is parousia. Now let's look at another verse that is used often, is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 through 52. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. Now, Paul speaks here of a future moment when living Christians will be transformed instantaneously at the last trumpet. Now, the proponents of the rapture argue that this quote-unquote twinkling of an eye, that change implies some type of sudden stealthy removal of believers. But no, Paul is not describing a separate event, but the very same final resurrection transformation at Christ's return that he spoke of in the previous verse. He never suggests that there's two phases to Jesus' coming. Rather, he focused on how our mortal bodies will be gloriously changed into immortal ones when the end comes. The last trumpet is the signal of the ultimate consummation, not a preliminary event before some type of multi-year tribulation. Because Paul says, we will all be changed, leaving no group of believers not changed at Christ's coming, who must endure on earth. All the faithful are glorified at the final trumpet. And this aligns with the traditional view that Christ's second coming and the resurrection of believers happens together at the end of the age, not in phases. Remember, Jesus is coming back. So these Christians who have been transformed, they're still here. Okay, they're still here. And like you saw in the previous verse, they came to greet Jesus in the sky, and then he's coming back to earth. There is no ascension. Like they're not staying up there, you know? So here's another verse, which, by the way, is so funny and so ironic that the rapturists, I guess you could call them, actually believe this verse and they're not understanding it. And that is Matthew chapter 24, verses 40 through 41. It says, "Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left." Now, these words, right, that Jesus says, are often cited to illustrate, the rapture's aftermath, right? And in all these countless sermons, people imagine this literally 2 people working side by side. One is a righteous Christian, they're gone, and suddenly the other one stays behind. Now, here's the problem with that verse. It's taken out of context. If you read the verses prior, remember, I've shown you how this works with Christian exegetical and Christian texts. They take one verse and they're not putting it in context. If you read the 2 verses prior, look what it says. Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39. "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Now, this is key. Because it says, in the days of Noah, the people who were taken away by the flood. The people were taken away by the flood. It was the wicked who were swept away in judgment, and Noah's family was left behind, safely in the ark. Now, you wouldn't have thought about that if you just read the previous, the verses after that, where it says, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding in the mill, one will be taken, one will be left. So in this sense, this flips the common rapture interpretation on its head. In context, being taken is not a good thing. Those taken are analogous to those destroyed by the flood, whereas those who were left, like Noah, are the righteous people who remain. The Greek verbs could even be translated as One will be seized and one released, highlighting that the one left is the one who's spared, not the one who is seized and taken. You see what I mean? So rather than describing a blessed rapture for believers, the image of one taken, one left is part of Jesus' warning of a coming judgment. It symbolically portrays a separation. The judgment will take away the unfaithful, while the faithful will be preserved. So Jesus concludes, "Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming." The point of this whole these verses, is spiritual vigilance, not a timetable of a rapture event. Now let's look at some of the terminology that's actually used in the New Testament, the Greek terminology. So the term used in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17, right, is in the English is caught up, right? But the Greek word, harpagesometha, literally means to seize or to snatch, right? While the Latin word, in the Latin translations, we have the word rapiumur, which gives rise to the word rapture. Paul's usage is not on where believers are taken, but on the action of gathering them to Jesus. So the context suggests a temporary, quote-unquote, catching up for the purpose of meeting Christ as he arrives, not a permanent removal from earth. Again, it's going forth, welcoming your king back to the land, not away from. Remember, this is the coming of Christ, the second coming. So he's not just taking people away. No, he's coming first. He's coming to earth first. So there is no rapture here. And then we have another word, parousia. And this is a Greek word that's used frequently for Christ's return. It means presence and coming. Now, in secular Greek, it describes the official visit of an emperor or governor to a city. It's always public, and it's a celebrated event. So historical sources and even coins from the Roman era depict scenes of citizens welcoming the emperor, right? The term carried a sense of majesty and visibility. It was not a secret thing, and it has nothing to do with the instantaneous rapture idea. When Paul chooses parousia for Jesus' return, he envisioned a victorious public arrival of the true king to his realm. You see what I mean? That's what that means. It does not mean that people are being taken up into heaven in a rapture. It's not about that. So I guess the question is, how did this all happen? Like, where did people get the notion that this is where, that the rapture actually exists, that they could take those terms from the New Testament and completely misunderstand them? Well, it's very simple, because if you look at the historical development of the rapture doctrine, it really starts in the 19th century, right? Because for most of church history, no one taught about the rapture as we popular conceive it, right? There was no understanding of what the rapture was. And I'll get into the early Christian conception in a moment. But because remember, we've never seen anything about the rapture in the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. All it affirms is that Christ will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. But it makes no mention of a rapture or two-phase coming where the rapture occurs and then he comes back. The rapture concept originated in the early 1800s by a scholar by the name of John Nelson Darby. His dates are 1800 to 1882. He was a British evangelical and founder of the Plymouth Brethren movement. Now, in 1830, Darby developed something called dispensationalism. And this is how can I put this? This is like a framework that divides God's dealings with humanity into these distinct eras. So it draws like distinctions between the church and between Israel and things of that nature. So Darby believed that God had unfinished business, essentially, with ethnic Israel that was put on hold while the church is being gathered. So this led him to propose that before a final period of tribulation and the restoration of Israel, Christ would come secretly to take his church out of the world. After this rapture, God's prophetic clock for Israel would resume, and during this 7-year tribulation, followed by Christ's visible return with his saints. Now, initially, Darby's ideas were considered pretty radical and novel, because there was no proof for it. But as he was preaching throughout North America in the mid-1800s, his ideas found an audience. In the United States, it gained traction through several ways. The Scofield Reference Bible, 1909, which was edited by Cyrus Scofield, this study Bible included footnotes, systematizing the dispensational theology. So it included this concept of the rapture. And it was very widespread and very effective in teaching generations that the rapture doctrine was, in fact, a biblical text. But as we've seen, it's actually not. Well, it's a misunderstanding, let's put it that way. Then we have the Dallas Theological Seminary, right, founded in 1924. And this institution trained hundreds of pastors in this theology, in this dispensational theology, continued to spread. And then, of course, we have, popular media, right? In the 1970s, we had the bestseller, The Late Great Planet Earth, and we had the 1972, I believe, A Thief in the Night. We have the Left Behind series, right, which really put it on the map. That was in 1995 by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. And that novel brought the rapture theology to the mainstream, and selling tens of millions of copies, and of mostly evangelicals. And so what do you have? Because these books are portrayed in ways that sort of are trying to match biblical theology. But as we've seen, these verses that are being used to promote the rapture idea is not correct. Now, what's really interesting is, now if we back up, we don't even see this type of idea in the early church, right? The early church Christians lived with the expectation of Christ's return, but their understanding was much more straightforward, right? Jesus, he died, risen, and would come again, and that would be the climax of history, right? At that time, there would be a resurrection of the dead, the final judgment, all of that stuff, right? And of course, it would be merging heaven and earth in this sort of renewed creation. So, early church fathers like Ignatius and Irenaeus and Justin Martyr all anticipated a visible return of Jesus, but none proposed that Jesus comes part way to snatch the church and then comes fully back later, right? There is no sense of the rapture in early Christian work. There just wasn't. And so this whole idea is just not biblically based at all. It's complete fabrication or a misunderstanding. But when you really think about it, though, why is this concept even so popular, right? Why would people want this, right? So if you think about it, in times of turmoil, which we find ourselves in, and of course, remember, people have been saying the rapture has been coming for years and years. Every few years they say, the rapture's coming. Because in times of turmoil, a teaching that promises believers an airlift out of this apocalyptic tribulation that has been going on for 2,000 years has a very strong emotional appeal. I get it. And then there's, of course, the literal biblical, like literalists, right? Who try to read the words literally and see the word caught up, and it compels readers to think, oh, they're being snatched up literally. And then, of course, as we saw, we have seminaries and preachers and all this Christian media that consistently promotes this doctrine. So it becomes normative, right? It becomes the normal thing. And it's interesting because, yes, there are people who believe in the rapture all over the world, but it's really fertile here in the United States because of the evangelical culture that we have here. So it's a very individualistic thing. It's individual salvation is very valued, right? And it comes with a pessimistic view of the world's trajectory. Nothing new there. This has been going on for years. And of course, the films and the songs. So the evidence is clear. The rapture, as commonly taught, is a misinterpretation. It's a product of the 19th century, not an original apostolic doctrine. So when we let the Bible speak in its own context, we find that Jesus and the New Testament writers did not proclaim this two-stage removal and then return, but one grand climax. Jesus will return once, openly and triumphantly, and then people will be resurrected, the evil will be judged, and then the new kingdom will be made present. So it's teaching about Jesus' return, not escape from the world, but in fact the world's transformation. Because Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 13, new heavens and new earth in which righteousness dwells. And then in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verses 1 through 5, he says something to the effect, Jesus says, behold, I am making all things new. So this is not about being lifted off. This is about coming back. So the rapture is a complete mistranslation. And I just thought I would issue a video about this because I think it's very important for people to understand where did this idea even come from? And I proved that it's not even a biblical idea. It's a misinterpretation of a biblical idea. So with that, that is the end of this podcast. I have a few podcasts that I owe you. I'm still working on them. I hope you're well, and I will speak to you soon. So mote it be.